Okay, here we are. So, the girls are not with us tonight. They're in North Carolina visiting Mandy's sister and her family. But if you didn't get to meet the boys this morning, since they were in their classes, they're right down here. And definitely make a point to get to meet them. They'll answer any question for you. They love to answer questions. Well, we left off this morning showing you some of the pictures of why we couldn't do ministry in the village of Nambaza during rainy season. So instead of doing that, we helped the people in Choma, the town of Choma, with their outreach development. And so this is a picture of Lorelei sharing the gospel with about 8 Zambian children, and Pastor Arthur Munkombwe, who's our closest friend in Zambia. He was our language coach. He was our cultural guide, and just one of the most amazing pastors that we've met there in Zambia. Well, it was his youth group that were wanting to know how they could share the gospel with their friends. And so we shared things with them and said, now we need to go out and do this because you haven't learned anything until you've done it. And they were pretty timid. So when Lorelei showed them how it was done, you can imagine the response. Well, if she can do it, we can do it. And so it was really encouraging to see. And of course, Lorelei loved having the opportunity. She's always done things like that with us here in Parkersburg. But at that point, we didn't yet know how to speak Tonga. And so the only way she could do it was with help from Pastor Arthur. Now, out in Nambaza during the dry season, this is what the church, it was called Kauka Baptist Church. This is what it looked like. Those bricks were actually going to be used for other projects. The church itself didn't have walls, just a grass thatched roof. And that's where we would do a lot of our 1-week-long block classes. Central Africa Baptist College up in Kitwe, in the northern part of the country, had started developing these, but they were struggling to get them to the level that could be used with local languages in more rural settings. And we were looking for things that we could do to train leaders. So it worked out perfect that we did that using their materials but customizing them. And when my father-in-law, Bill Rillo, he and my mother-in-law were coming out, they hadn't seen Mandy and the kids, and so they wanted to come out and visit. So I said, well, how about you teach one of these classes? And we chose one that it was on theology, and it was just an introduction to theology, but you're talking about something that's a bit intimidating to introduce these ideas into a rural setting like that. So we worked together for quite some time through Skype and other things, and he put together just a phenomenal curriculum, taught out there for a week, and he had help from Grace Baptist Church in Choma, one of their interpreters. It was so phenomenal that he got done. He said, man, I could do this forever. To which I then later told the president of the college, hey, we've got a guy who could do this forever. He's actually now raising support. He's been a pastor for about 16 years in the Cincinnati area. And I think that's right, 15 or 16. But he's going to let you know that because he's going to be here at your church in 2 weeks. And they are transitioning out of the pastoral ministry in Cincinnati to come oversee a block class program that I'll share with you in just a little bit. This is the other church out in that village area. This one was about a 30-minute drive, and this is called Kukuse Baptist Church. And if you look at it, this is just a typical village church. Those are mud walls, cow dung floor, hand-carved benches, grass, roof, and that's all you need. Remember we talked about indigenous churches? One of the problems is a lot of well-meaning American churches will end up going over and helping with these building projects, but it's a church built for an American setting. And they can't maintain it. They could never have built it, and they can't maintain it. Whereas this, no one helped them. I went out there to visit them, and they said, oh, we're almost done constructing our own church building. It is perfect. It's what the average people, it's similar to the style of the average house, and that's what the church building should be. So we're just really proud of the believers there for making wise decisions. And the church, or the class that we had just taught here, was Old Testament survey. When we got done, one of the young men who had been Seventh-day Adventist, he came up and he said, I always thought you Baptists did not value the Old Testament, but I see that I've been very wrong. In fact, you can't understand the gospel or the New Testament without the Old Testament, and I've realized that I've been putting my faith in my works. I've been trying to live by the Old Testament law. I need to get saved, and he did. Took him through the gospel in Isaiah, just like Philip did with the Ethiopian eunuch. And he got saved, and he's now a student at the college. He wants to go be a teacher back in the village of Nambaza. Well, so that kind of brings a conclusion to what happened there from 2012 to 2014. Your goal as a missionary is to work yourself out of a job, not to stay there and be the pastor forever. Sometimes being a missionary pastor is a good thing, but if you're going to stay the pastor, then stop taking mission support and let the church there pay you. And so we were excited to see that this was happening. The churches there, we never pastored any of them. We came alongside and we trained the leaders like we shared with you this morning. And people said, but were they really ready? Yes, they were. Now that didn't mean they were totally trained, that they didn't have further to grow. Really, who does? I have further to grow, and you have further to grow. But you learn to grow by putting into practice what you have learned, by stepping out on faith. And that's what they've done. They had learned everything that they needed from us, and now they needed us to step out of the way, give them the chance to do what they've been trained to do, and continue learning by experience. And so since then, those churches have planted 3 more churches. And they've gone to another church that a Southern Baptist missionary, had started, but it was failing. And they went and helped rehabilitate it. And they're all doing well. Furthermore, those churches out in the bush, they're not ready to do it all on their own, but through the partnership that they still have with the churches in Choma, they have reached out to 2 further villages where they've been so hostile to anything that they're actually known as the killing villages. When the chief of the area heard that those churches, Koka and Kokuse, were going out there, he said, be very careful. Because when I send messengers from here, and he's the chief of that area, when I send messengers out there, they've killed my messengers. And when these believers went out there, not only were they not killed, but they were welcomed, and they said, we would like for you to come back and tell us more. And so they are. It's just an amazing thing. Now, when you think about that, though, understand that doesn't mean that we've cut off all, yes, we've moved further, but we still maintain relationships, just like Paul did, through writing of epistles. That's one of the ways he did, through return visits, through sending Timothy or Titus. And we do the same. We go back once a year and teach an additional block class down in that area, and we maintain contact through phone calls and through email and things like that. It's amazing. You don't have hardly anything. I mean, it's a rural area, and yet you'll find people with smartphones out there, and so we can stay in touch. Pretty amazing. Well, the question then is, what do you do next? Well, Paul always continued spreading further out, and so that was our pattern as well. And many of the people who thought that what we were trying to do just could never be done, they were surprised. God did it. And so there's the college that you already know about because of Nathan and Rachel Washer's family. They were working at Central Africa Baptist College. And we were with the same mission board, so we knew each other, and we would go up every year for their conference in December. And so when they heard of what was happening, they said, come up here, because we already have a program for training pastors and chaplains, and we've got a counseling program, but we want to start a missions program. We want to train African missionaries to reach the world. But because we're accredited, we have to have someone to start this program who has a master's degree in missions. And to this point, out of the missionaries that are preaching the gospel, I'm the only one with a master's degree in missions. So it worked out perfectly. And so we moved up there. And now you're talking about the second largest city in the country. We're not city people. But even Kitwe is still small compared to Parkersburg. Infrastructure-wise, it's a lot smaller. Parkersburg would be like 10 times the size of Kitwe. But in numbers, population-wise, Kitwe is significantly larger. In fact, the number 350,000 that you see on there is only within the city limits. They now are saying that it's closer to 1 million people if you count the whole surrounding area. And so it's a big area. Well, at the college, I have the privilege and the responsibility of being the director of missions for the college, which involves developing missions curriculum, not just recycling what I had for my training, but customizing it for the African culture. And then with that means I do all the teaching because of the accreditation. So that's a huge thing. It's to be able to, that in itself is a full-time job. But because of the use of the block classes that we had done, the president, Phil Hunt, said, we'd love to see you take that over and expand it, but we'll wait until after you've been up here a while, and maybe after you get done with your first furlough. Well, that was the intention, but when I got up there, it was about 2 weeks, and he said, listen, we're starting a new building program, and I can't oversee this. It's just in one place. Can you oversee that? And I said, oh, okay. Well, it's now expanded into 5 other countries. That by itself is a full-time job because you've got to have connections in each place, be the first one on the ground to make the connections, try to figure out how to get the materials translated into a local language, deal with getting the curriculum and the teachers lined up, and then all the government hassle of getting the visas and everything for those. It's huge. That's what my father-in-law is coming to take over so that I don't have to do that anymore. It demands a full-time position. Then one of my favorite parts about this position at the college is missions is the responsibility of the local church, not a Bible college. The Bible college comes alongside of the church to do the training, but it's got to be the responsibility of the church. So the churches are saying, well, wait a minute, you're training people that we have sent to you to be trained, but they're telling us that it's our job to send them out. We don't know how to do that. So they've been asking if we would come and do missions conferences. So you're talking about churches who've never been involved, who want to get involved and want to get it right at the beginning. It's just awesome. But that's a lot of stuff. And in addition to that, we're trying to continue modeling this. So we, with the Washer family, and with the Hunt family, and with a single missionary named Rachel Johnson, started an international church plant. Because where we live now, there's a lot of copper mining. So with the copper mines come a lot of people from all over the world. And so now we have an international church plant that has 200 people. Started with 30. 200 people now, and there's 12 countries represented. It's just amazing. So just to keep up with all these is beyond you. Now think about the passage that Pastor Roger started us off with this morning in Matthew 9 about pray to the Lord of the harvest because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Yes, that is still true today. So here's some pictures of what's happening there. This is Central Africa Baptist College. We were having a groundbreaking for that new building that day. But this is our primary location. It's where all of our classes are held, and it's the dormitory building as well. It's expanded even from that picture, though. This one I've just included because we were having a conference every December. We have a leadership conference. And people from up to as many as 12 different African nations will travel in to attend. And this one was on the need to combat false teaching. Just like in the book of Acts, when the gospel comes through, false teachers follow soon after. And so you can see we had a lot of interest in that because over 500 people came to attend that conference. Well, it was last year, almost exactly. It's 1 week shy of being exactly when Mike Allen came out to be with us. And boy, did he meet a need for us, because I told you we had a chaplaincy program. Many of the people who get the training do it all through block classes, which only happen 4 times a year. And our main one happens in December at that leadership conference. Our previous director for the chaplaincy program had resigned and is now doing ministry in the capital city of Lusaka. So we had just gotten a missionary, originally born in Congo, who was then in America as a refugee, who joined the American army and was involved with chaplaincy. Now he's the chaplaincy director, and he said, but I wasn't planning on doing this. I need help. I need someone to teach this. And I said, I happen to know a lot of chaplains with the United States Army. Let me see if any of them are willing to come. And Mike worked and squeezed and pleaded with his superiors and was granted permission to come. And we had an awesome time. This is him teaching the chaplains. And there are chaplains from the military, from the prison, from the police. What else? I mean, there were chaplains, every kind of chaplain. Yeah, medical chaplains as well. And so I think by the end of the week, how many did we have that week? Yeah, I mean, first day we already had 80, which had broken our record. And over 100 by the end of the week, because they're traveling from all over the country, and sometimes breakdowns occur. And I'll tell you what, for a bunch of chaplains, they can be a little bit of an unruly bunch. And so he had his hands full, but I'm telling you what, they loved it. Because most of the time when our chaplains are coming in, up to this point, all of the classes that they had been taking were classes on Bible, books of the Bible, theology, things of that nature. They weren't specific to chaplaincy, and that's what they were hungering, because they had good foundational ideas now, but how are they going to go out and do briefings? You know, they're all expected to do it, but they don't know how to do it. And when they don't do it right, then they get called down in front of the rest of the people. And so when Mike comes in there and he starts coming in with all these practical things, I'm telling you what, it was a blast to sit in and watch them work through these things and submit their assignments. And so that was exciting. And be in prayer, because next week, that's getting started again. And I don't remember who the speaker is for the chaplains this time, but they have a pretty hard act to follow. Well, this is some of the classes that I teach there at the college. I've had an opportunity to speak at that large conference. In the one picture here, I'm teaching a church planning class. And just like Mike with the chaplains, I want to make sure it's practical. That when they get out, they don't just have theory, but they've got a plan, and that they can put it into use. So that's what they're doing. They're presenting their project, and one of them then got to go out and do an internship after that class. And he said, man, I'm glad that I took that. He said, there's so many things that I would have missed, that I wouldn't have even noticed of what was happening if all I did was go in and observe without having this class first. Over here, I was teaching the evangelism and discipleship class, and we go out, and each student has to go out with me and share the gospel. And I only jump in if there's an urgent need. I want to see them doing it, and they're doing a great job. This is a picture of Keatway Church. We don't have our own building yet. That's another thing you can be praying about. At this point, we've maxed out the building and the parking of where we're at. Where we meet is kind of like a VFW hall for the World War I and II memorial. And as you can see from that picture, we've got Chinese, these are South Africa, British, Zambian, lots of Zambian up front, Zimbabwean, then we've got American, we've got Canadian, more South African, Australian. Oh, there's Nathan Washer, Nathan and Rachel. And Canadian, Mexican, you name it. It's just amazing to see. On an average day, average Sunday, we're kind of thinking this is a glimpse of what it's going to be like in heaven when you've got people from every kindred, tribe, nation, and tongue. This was our charter Sunday. We are now an officially organized church registered with the country of Zambia, because you have to there. And we actually left the charter membership open for an additional 6 weeks because we had a lot of people in this community who travel for work. And so our actual membership was larger than that, but that's our charter Sunday. And in the last year, we've had 29 baptisms. It has just been amazing to see all these people who are coming to Christ, and some of them who came to Christ in a different place, but who were never discipled. And remember, that's part of the Great Commission. When you think of Matthew 28, he says, go, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. Well, that means that our job in missions is not over simply with evangelism. I would like to ask you to be praying for this man here, Sean. Sean had been deeply involved with alcohol and drugs before he got saved. And he truly is trying to break free from that. But it's got a hold on him. And so when he wanted to join the church, we let him know, well, we will hold you accountable to this. And this is what the Bible says about church discipline. Are you willing to submit to that? And he said, yes, I need that. Well, within the last few weeks, he's really, he's just kind of struggled with it again. And so much to the surprise of many other members of the church, I was involved with several conference calls, and so we brought him in. And church discipline is always for restoration and is meant to be a positive thing before getting to the point of being negative. And so we said, listen, your choices are go into a rehab program, and there's only one place in the country that has one, or you can't be a member until this is not a part of your life, and we're willing to help you. And the church membership voted to pay for 90% of the cost because they said, this is our brother, and we need to help him. That was amazing. So be praying for him. The program was actually supposed to have ended this last week, so I'm looking forward to hearing a report on what happened there. And of course, it was exciting because two of the people who've been baptized this last year were my children. Both Georgia and Warwick have received Christ as their Savior since we've been there. Neither one actually in Keatway. It was prior to that, but they got baptized once we were at Keatway Church. So I know some of you probably were wondering as you got all these prayer letters, why this change? I mean, you went to go out to the bush, and now you're in the city, and we know you like the bush, so why? Well, I think you have to remind yourself of that mission statement we shared this morning. We were sent to facilitate an indigenous church planting movement, and if it's a movement, it's going to grow. And although we prefer and are more comfortable in the bush, it has nothing to do with what we want. It has to do with what God's doing. And I think it's a living example of the principle that when you're faithful in little, God will entrust you with much. And so there's no change in focus. There is a change in venue. We're still facilitating an indigenous church planting movement, but instead of having to motivate the local churches to get involved with missions, they're now sending the people to the college, saying, train them. And come teach us how to be the sending churches. Really, what we're seeing is now we were ministering to a small village in Zambia, to then reaching Zambia, to now reaching Africa. And so it's just exciting to see. And we don't know all that God has in store, but we're following him one step at a time. I know that Nathan probably shared this with you when he was here, that Central Africa Baptist College exists to train the next generation of servant leaders in Africa for Great Commission living. Well, if you think about this focus on Africa, I just want to give you some statistics as you think about and pray about what's happening there. There are 1.3 billion people on the continent of Africa. That's 20% of the world's population, and there are still 744 unreached people groups on the continent. The continent is made up of 54 countries, so it's not like the United States where we have 50 states and you can easily travel amongst them. No, each one is its own country, and you have to cross through immigration every time you go to a different one. But for our block class program, we've got an advantage in that there are 22 of these countries that speak English as their major government language, making it easy for us to get in. But 41% of Africa is still Muslim. 22 of the countries are majority Muslim, making it a challenge. Now, sometimes people say, okay, well, that's great, but I just want to show you, when we talk about reaching Africa, Africa's enormous. If you picked up the United States of America and placed it on top of the continent of Africa, this is the area that we've got our block classes in right now. And we've got one up here as well. That's all that the United States would fill up. Japan would fill up Madagascar. You've got Siberia, India, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Mexico, and China. It would take all of those to fill up the continent of Africa. So when we're talking about reaching Africa, we're talking about a monumental task. And our goal then is not to do it ourselves as foreign missionaries. Remember, global missions should be from everywhere to everywhere, not from the west to the rest. So Our goal then, our vision, is to facilitate obedience to the Great Commission until Christ has been made known not by the college, but by reproducing gospel-preaching churches in every village, town, and city across Africa. Well, every village, that's a huge task. But that's where guys like Joseph Mwambazi that I was telling you about, he's the guy that got saved. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he said, I want to go back and teach children in the schools of Nambaza, because if we can reach them as children, and there they have a religious education class, he can preach the gospel right in class and have no problem. What an awesome opportunity. But every village, town, and city, every dot that you see on here is an unreached people group. This is South Sudan. That's where we do one of our classes, our block class program. That's the only place we've had a complete program finished so far. It's just amazing. And so that's what we're trying to see happen. Now, there's a lot of those places. These are the Muslim-dominated countries. We can't get into them, but my students can because they're African. I come there, they figure I'm there for business or I'm a missionary. In both cases, they don't want me there. But when an African comes in, it's not as big of a challenge. So that's what we've been doing with the ministry, and you can see what God has brought. We've planted, we've watered, other people have planted, other people have watered, but everything you've seen is God giving the increase. Well, Mandy, why don't you come on up, and Mandy's going to start by just sharing with you some of the life. I mean, I've shared with you the ministry side, but you can't do ministry without living there. And so Mandy's going to start by sharing that, and we've got some of the guys from up in the sound booth who are coming down with a microphone. So if you have any questions, we will be up here for your questions. And so if you, Mandy's going to share something, and then we'll start having question and answer.
Some of the most common questions we ask, especially for people who follow along with our prayer letters and the things that have been happening in our life, is how do you guys deal with malaria? And how do you handle health issues living in Africa? And we have to say the Lord has really blessed us that we've been able to find good doctors, or at least he's brought us to good doctors when we've needed them. Malaria is definitely a challenge living in Africa. It's not a matter of if you get it, but when. And so over the last 4 years, our family has had quite a struggle with malaria. Excuse me. A quick little health lesson. Malaria is not a virus. It's not a disease. It's actually a parasite that's carried by one breed of mosquito. The Anopheles mosquito carries the malaria parasite in its saliva. So when it bites you, it inserts the malaria parasite into your bloodstream. The malaria parasite then gets into your liver, reproduces, goes throughout your body. The symptoms are very much like the flu, but just much, much more intense. The bummer is the flu can occasionally be fatal, but malaria is always fatal untreated. Thankfully, Africa is so used to everyone having malaria that the treatment is very readily available. In the last 4 years, Jamie has had malaria 18 times. That's excessive. Lorelai has had it 16 times. That is excessive. She's 12 years old, so that's a lot on a little body. And then the rest of us just going down from there. And so if you think, just pray. Pray that as we go back, that the Lord would strengthen our bodies, that malaria may not be such a concern and such a bother. When you're that tired, it causes, malaria causes hypoglycemia, and it also causes anemia on top of the other symptoms. And so you take a 3-day treatment to eradicate the malaria from your system, but it can take 2 to 3 weeks to recover for your body to gain full strength back. And if you count it up with the amount of times Jamie's had it in the last 4 years, about the time he starts to regain strength, he gets malaria again. And so definitely be praying that as we go back, we don't see it that excessive an amount. Otherwise, it's going to have to really limit the amount of time that we can be in Zambia. But like I said, the Lord's brought us very good doctors, and the times that we've needed them, he's provided the treatments that we need. And so he's been very gracious in that way. For those of you that followed along, about 2 years ago, I had a major surgery in Zambia. I was having some twinges on my lower right side. We were in town, thankfully, at the time. And I thought, well, I'll just go see the doctor. He'll tell me it's nothing. We were getting ready to go back out to the bush for 4 weeks. And I thought, I'll go to the doctor. He'll tell me it's nothing. I can just ignore it. We'll go back out and keep working. And I went in, and he goes, I think it might be your appendix. So it could be a grumbling appendicitis, and we'll knock it out with antibiotics, or it could be acute, and you'll have to have your appendix out. So he put me on a massive dose of antibiotics, and it just continued to get worse. Through an ultrasound, he also found a large cyst on my ovary and said, I want you to go to the capital city. Excuse me, I want you to go to this hospital. I want you to ask for this surgeon and be very adamant about it. So every person I talked to, we walked into like reception. I'm like, I need to see this surgeon. And we go to paying, and I need to see this surgeon. And so I was to have a CT scan done. And through that CT scan, we found that, excuse me, it was either the appendix or the cyst was leaking infection into my abdomen. And so he said, you're not going anywhere. We have to do surgery right now. And it was one of those situations where the Lord takes everything completely out of your hands. And so to worry is pointless. And so you just say, all right, Lord, you brought me here. You put me in this. You're going to have to bring me through it. That's all I got. And it was a very strange experience. I walked into the operating room, climbed up on the table. They strapped me down, and I'm wondering, am I going to get knocked out for this, or am I just going to close my eyes? Like, how are we doing this? And they were setting up the instruments and everything. I lay there and watched it all, wondering what was going to happen. And just at the last minute, they knocked me out. There's no morphine in Zambia. So coming out of surgery, they don't put you on any pain medications. And it's, if you think about, like, I remember my grandmother talking about surgeries when she was young, like back in the 30s and 40s. And that's a lot like healthcare in Zambia. So it was kind of taking a warp back in time. So expecting a small incision, because they're just taking out a little bit, and I get out of surgery and they've cut me from hip bone to hip bone. And then come to find out, because of the infection, they actually had to take everything out and wash it up and put it back in and zip me back together. And having friends in the healthcare profession here, they're sending us emails. Oh my goodness, what are you doing? How many drains do you have in you for the infection? What about this? What about these drugs? What about this? And I'm like, we got nothing. Like, they unzipped me, took me all out, washed me, put me back in, zipped me back up, put me on antibiotics, and we're done. And you're going to die. You're going to go into septic shock. And and I'm like, well, then you better pray, because this is what we got. This is Africa. This is what we have to work with. And the Lord was gracious. We had no infection. There was no complications post-care. And the Lord was just so faithful to us through those circumstances, and the opportunity that we had to get to see our provider and our healer and our Savior in new ways that we would not have experienced him had we not gone through these situations. It drew us closer as a family. I was on strict bed rest for 6 months post-op, and so the whole family had to pitch in. Jamie had to cook. The kids were definitely worried. Mom, what are we going to do? How are we going to eat? And Daddy's got it. No, really, Mom. How are we going to do this? And Jamie stepped up and became the family chef, and the kids did laundry and dishes, and everybody just pitched in. And so it was a blessing to see how the Lord brought us closer as a family through those circumstances. And so we really do appreciate your prayers through those times. And like I said, just continue to pray that as we go back, the health challenges aren't as much, and that it would allow us to have stronger bodies and stronger health to be more effective in ministry.
Quite an adventure, huh? All right, well, you probably have some questions, and so if you do, I guess stand up or wave your hand around, and he'll come to you with the microphone.
So what do you see as your biggest obstacle to sharing the gospel when you're out in the bush?
I would say, you might jump in and have a different answer, but I would say what you run into there, they are readily willing to listen. That's not the issue. The issue is understanding. they're very quick to add Jesus to the list of all the other gods that they already worship or fear. And so when you share the gospel, it's almost always, you're going to get a positive response. But it doesn't mean that you had a genuine conversion. So a lot of times when that happens, you almost feel like you're wanting them to believe, but you're making it hard for them. I mean, just kind of like think about Jesus. How many times do you read what Jesus was doing when he's sharing the gospel? You're like, come on, you're making it so hard. You told the guy he's got to sell everything? Okay, well, I mean, we kind of feel that way a lot of times, that we are trying to make sure they truly understand and that they're counting the cost. That's the biggest thing, and I think closely tied to that is the fact that you're battling an animistic worldview. So, and then this is specific to the village, because that was your question. In town, there's a different answer, but in the village, the animistic worldview, we tend to focus on all these verses like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Out in the bush, that doesn't connect with them. If you were going to summarize the culture of Africa, it's fear and power. Those are the driving forces. So because I fear the evil spirits, I go to the man who has power over them, the witch doctor. And when they're coming to you for advice, that's a lot of times what they're looking for. They want an immediate relief from pain and fear. And so you have a different starting point, entirely different starting point than what you would do with an unsaved person here. Anything to add to that?
No, that's what I would definitely answer. It's hard to see them living in such fear and to know that Christ offers freedom from that. It's difficult to watch and difficult to see, but it's also kind of a blessing to so tangibly get to see the spiritual battle that's happening. It prevents apathy and complacency on our part, because you have to be watchful and vigilant and putting on the armor of God and knowing that you are going into a very physical spiritual battle.
Now, in town, let me just address that. In town, the core worldview is still the same. It's fear versus power. The challenge we have there is that several presidents back in 2000, there was a president, Frederick Chiluba. And even prior to that, I forget what year he actually made the proclamation, but he proclaimed Zambia to be a Christian nation. So everyone in Zambia said, okay, we're Christian. It opened the door to be able to do missions work very easily with very little hindrance, but what happened as a result of that was a lot of false teaching coming in. So if you think about Joel Osteen, health, wealth, prosperity, the whole word of faith movement, put that into a culture dominated by fear and power, it really swept through. So we've got a false prophet who's from Nigeria, who's famous around the world, but especially in Africa. His name is T.B. Joshua. He sells little bottles of holy water. It's very much like what you would do if you went to the witch doctor. They sell you charms. I told you about the one this morning. Okay, the man of God, as they call themselves, has replaced the witch doctor. And so people are coming. I've shared the gospel with one of the guys in town, and he said, Pastor, I want you to pray for me. And I said, okay, about what? He goes, I am not, how did he say it? I am not succeeding. I am not prospering. I said, what do you mean? At my job, I don't have enough money. I don't have this. I don't have this. I said, okay, so how does that relate to what we were just sharing? If I truly was saved, I would be prospering. And that's the message they're getting all the time. If you have a problem, it's because you didn't have enough faith. And so that's the challenge we run into in sharing the gospel in a city environment. Still same core, but different outflow. Any other questions?
I'll try to phrase this as well as I can. I'm trying to put my thoughts together on the question, but in American cities versus American rural environments, there is a perception that the rural is less educated than the city. And I can only assume that that occurs or is going to occur in Africa as well as they industrialize and go through much the same transition that we did a few hundred years ago. If Christianity becomes the dominant religion in rural areas without also becoming a major influence in the city environment, do you think, what kind of risk do you think you run of Christianity being simply viewed as the next witch doctor treatment, much like you had just said with the Joel Osteen type, but true Christianity being the belief that spreads throughout the rural areas, but not looked upon favorably by those in more elite classes?
Okay. Well, you want to start off?
Gotta think through the answer.
Okay. First of all, here it is perceived that the rural are not as educated, whereas in America that's often not even the case. Might not have as many degrees, but having been taught how to think and having access to information through the internet, we all know that people in the city might think of themselves that way, but it's just not true. In Africa, it is actual reality. The people in the village are very intelligent, but they are poorly educated. That guy Joseph that I showed you, he's the only person who's ever graduated grade 12 out in the village. All of the others, usually if they were men, they might have gone as far as grade 7, 8. I know of a few that made it to grade 9. If they're women, they usually stopped by grade 4. Their grade 4 is the equivalent of...
Say probably second grade.
Okay. So if they finished 4th grade, they're actually the equivalent of someone here with 2nd grade.
They can read and do basic math. They can read a bit.
Someone who graduated from high school is probably the equivalent of someone who graduated from junior high here. The standard of education is very much lower. So we do have that problem. And because Christianity has already become the thing that replaced the witch doctor in cities, it's rampantly spreading. I don't know if any of you have... There's a man, they call him the Spurgeon of Africa. His name is Conrad Mbewe. I see a few smiling faces. He is a personal friend of ours. He is in Lusaka, Zambia. And so when we were doing our work out in the bush, we said, you know what? This is your country, and you've had missionaries here ever since David Livingstone, 172 years ago. You've seen a lot of missionaries come and go, and I'm sure that you have some things you wish that they would do differently. So tell us. I want to share with you what we're doing in Nambaza and share with us some things, what you wish we would know. He said, sounds to me like you've got it all in good control, but the only way that I can give any further information is to come out with you to Nambaza. And he did. This man who speaks all over the world at John MacArthur's Strange Fire conference and all of that, he was one of the speakers. And this guy is, he's in America more often than we are. And, and so he took time out of his schedule to come out there. And his answer to your question was, where you're at is really untouched. The cults haven't made it out here. The Seventh-day Adventists are out here. And other than that, you're pretty much untouched. The gospel can be communicated in its purest form. And that gives you a great advantage. And I think that's one of the reasons why we saw what we saw out there. You don't often see that same level of success in the towns because of that. So it's a challenge. On the one hand, you're dealing with the reality that these are uneducated people, and how am I going to communicate deep level truth in a language that even though we were speaking it, you're trying to take, you can speak about concrete matters very easily with them, but talking about ideas and concepts that are not tangible, that's an entirely different ballgame. So there's the challenge there, but at the same time, you've got the advantage of not having all the syncretism and false religions there. So that's the balance. That's the struggle to face every day. And I think, once again, that's why we always went back to no one can reach a Zambian better than a fellow Zambian. So our key was to train faithful men who would be able to teach others also. Any other question or anything to add? Okay, any other questions? It's like an auction. Going once? Okay. Chola, you don't have a question, but I bet you have some answers.
So I just want to know, when you come into these villages, do they all have these witch doctors? And what is their reaction to you?
The witch doctors?
Yes, I would think that they would see you as a huge threat to them because that's their livelihood.
Yes, you are correct. Want to start?
My ministry in the bush is a little bit more protected, I guess, than Jamie's because the way that we lived, I did everything the way they did it. So my time was spent homeschooling the kids, getting the laundry done, cooking, just life. So I didn't always know who the witch doctors were. It can be a man, it can be a woman. It doesn't matter. So I wasn't always aware of who was what or anything, and my goal was to kind of build relationships with the women where I could and try to minister where I could. Jamie, and it's very segregated in the bush. Jamie, of course, was with the men. He met with the headmen. He was meeting with the leadership in the church, the chief, and so he kind of had more of an idea of who they were. I think in my ignorance I was blessed because I just kind of greeted everyone, and, I was just trying to be friendly to everyone. But there's definitely strong opposition there, and like we were talking about the tangible spiritual battle, we don't usually get into details, but we saw some crazy stuff, especially when Jamie was teaching a block class or we were working within the church on worldview issues or really things that were going to impact the hearts of the people, and you would see spiritual warfare coming out from the woodwork. The Lord really proved his power through that, where you had people coming and saying, you guys need to be careful or things like that. And you never really worried about it because greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. And the Lord really did prove that over and over. And it was good for the believers there to see that, because even after they're saved, they still have that ingrained in them that the witch doctor is powerful and he has power over us and we have to appease. And so that's where you get that syncretism of, okay, maybe I can use Jesus as a good luck charm to keep the witch doctor, at bay. And you get all these crazy things that kind of start happening in the hearts and minds of the believers there. And so we did face opposition. But like I said, the Lord was always faithful. And it was such a testimony to the believers that were there to see them strengthened and for them to see how we handled it. And then to see them, as many of them would run into situations with the witch doctors, to see how they would have to handle it, and to see the spiritual growth there, and as their faith would continue to develop, was a really, it was a special thing to get to see and experience. But,
Yeah. So they are everywhere. They're not necessarily in every village, but they're within walking distance of every village. They do carry certain canes and things that demonstrate that they are, and everybody else knows that, but if you're a foreigner, a lot of times you don't. We have a missionary friend who gave a ride to a witch doctor who he was like, I need help, I'm an old man walking. So he gave him a ride, and when he got to the church, everyone's like, we never thought the missionary would be sitting next to the witch doctor. He's like, what? Yeah, they hated us. They did lose a lot of business. And so, as Mady said, we don't often tell a lot of the details because we don't want to sensationalize it. I'll just give you a few examples without a lot of details. We were meeting with the headmen of the whole area when we were there in 2010. To decide if this is the area that God wanted us to minister in. While we were there, we were the ones waiting there at the home of one of the local believers, And it was just crazy. We'd already had an encounter with one of the witch doctor the first night that we got there, that just manifested itself in strange ways that we could only say, when there was no solution from us praying, it involved Warwick, and it was just like he was trying to get away from something terrifying while he was in the tent and not even responding to us. So we're praying and nothing's happening. And I said, you know what? We're not the authorities here. You're the believers here. So I explained that to the pastor, who explained it to the others, and he said, I think you're very wise to recognize that. So while we were holding him, we asked the believers to be praying, and it went from total freaking out panic mode to slipping off to sleep. And then the drums of the witch doctor, where they'd been marching around where we were sleeping, faded off in the distance, and everything was fine. 2 days later, we're having this meeting with all the headmen, and each headman was bringing their advisors. We didn't think about it at the moment, but who are their advisors going to be? The witch doctors. The kids are out playing, having a great time that morning. I'm holding Warwick again, and I go to greet the first headman who arrived. I don't know who this guy is with him. As soon as I shake the man's hand, Warwick projectile vomits all over me and past me. And that was just the first. Then Georgia started. Then Lorelei started. All three of our kids. And it was like every 20 minutes for about 8 hours of the day. And we're thinking, where's all this coming from? Because, I mean, there's not enough fluid in them for this. At first, we thought the women were trying to be very encouraging. Oh, don't worry.
It was mainly Georgia. And it got to where she was just this limp little rag doll. I couldn't get her to take any fluids. She just wasn't moving anymore. She just laid there, and she just kept throwing up. And we are, 100 miles outside the nearest medical clinic. So at that point, you're like, Lord, these kids are yours. There's nothing I can do. You've got to do something. And the women would come and say, Madam, I know the Lord's going to heal your child. And it was interesting because you could tell they were trying to convince themselves as much as encourage me. And we've been very blessed that our children have been able to develop relationships with different of the Zambian women. They call them their Zambian mothers. And when the kids were little, they just put them, tie them on their back like their own babies and spoil them rotten. And they've been really blessed to have those relationships. So this one woman, Teresa, had just really fallen in love with Georgia and had really helped take care of her. And so this whole time Georgia's sick, they keep bringing me tubs of warm water so I can bathe her, and trying to provide food and broth and things for me to try to feed her. And nothing's working. We're just praying. And when the meeting was over and everyone left, this is no exaggeration. It's one of those where you're like, was she faking? She hopped up like nothing had happened and just took off running, playing with the rest of the kids. And you're like, wait a second. You were here like dying, completely dehydrated, so sick you couldn't even lift your head, and all of a sudden you're up running around and playing. And when she got up and started playing, the women started screaming and dancing and like making all their noises, and they're picking her up and dancing around with her and praising the Lord, and they had their little worship service just praising the Lord when they saw that she was okay. And so Teresa, her Zambian mother, came to me and she said, I knew that she was going to die, and I couldn't come and I couldn't see her because I knew that the Lord was going to take her home, because when this happens, children don't recover. And she said it was a miracle of God that she is alive today. And so she was the one who was making the food and getting the hot water and preparing everything and sending it with the other ladies. But it was just a crazy thing. I mean, the Lord, there was a spiritual battle going on that at the time we kind of felt ignorant of. And then when, like I said, when she hopped up and just was like, okay, I'm fine now, you realized, hold on a second, this wasn't just a regular sickness. This is a spiritual battle that's happening, and the devil's really good at picking on the weak ones and picking on the young ones. And so the Lord prevailed, and it was a beautiful thing to get to see, but not a very pleasant thing to have to experience.
Yeah. And during that time, I was supposed to be presenting and speaking, and so I would go from helping to then go and teach my part and then come back to helping. And all of the people are watching that too, which is also not normal in that culture, but they were really actually surprised and pleased with that. And literally, I mean, it was when the last witch doctor left, head man with his witch doctor left, that it was, I mean, Lorelei was like after they started going, Lorelei was the first one to start feeling better. Then Warwick, but when the last one left, Georgia just hopped up like there was nothing that had happened. And you're talking 8 hours of misery. So those are just two. I mean, we've had, during our, Mandy said when we're teaching on major worldview topics, we've had hyenas come through and devastate the students' cattle, rip the skull right off of pigs. We've had hives in a whole group of bees swarm us, and then like a hand from heaven swat them down. Find thousands of dead bees all around our tent in the morning, and Mandy's allergic to bees. It's just so when you ask the question, I bet you didn't think you were going to hear all that. Those are just the highlights. So yeah, it's very, when you think of reading through the Old Testament and the showdown of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, that kind of thing is happening across Africa every day. And it's real. It's not somebody sensationalizing. What it is in that place, Satan, he doesn't have as much power as God. We all know that. But because of the worldview of the people, he will expend the energy to hold them in fear. Whereas here, he doesn't need to do that. We're also self-absorbed with our material stuff that he doesn't care if we believe in him. He just doesn't want people to believe in Jesus. So he'll take the path of least resistance here, but he'll hold people in fear there. So, well, I think with that in mind, we need to wrap it up. I want to, Pastor Roger and I had talked about, we've got to have a passage of Scripture to tie things back to. I'm going to leave you with a challenge, because many of you are probably deer hunters. So this is our African version, an impala. I want to leave you with the challenge of leaping by faith, because I think in a church like Grace Gospel, we can be challenged to not waste our life on materialism, things like that. But, I think we've got a lot of people who are already sacrificially giving. Now it's that next step of how do you step out on faith to do what seems impossible or certainly uncomfortable. There's some lessons we can learn from the impala. The lesson is this: they have great ability, but it's often limited by their lack of visibility. So here is a Toyota Land Cruiser that is easily clearing the top of it. They're amazing jumpers. An impala can leap distances up to 33 feet in length. They can clear bushes and other obstacles by soaring 10 feet in the air, clearing a 10-foot. So if they were over in your gymnasium, picture the basketball goal, their feet would be over that, their horns would be above the backboard. That's how high they can leap. And yet, if you go to a zoo, you never see them behind enclosures 12, 15 feet tall. Usually what you find is that they're behind a solid wall, maybe a rock wall type thing, that they can't see over. It might only be 3 feet tall because their line of visibility is about 2 to 3 inches lower than that. You see, an impala will never jump to a location where it cannot see its landing spot ahead of time. And I think we as Christians are an awful lot like that. We want to be the kind of people who say, yes, God, I'll trust you. I'll do whatever you say, as long as I can see the outcome ahead of time. But that's not what we're called to do. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says, for we walk by faith, not by sight. That goes against every ounce of energy in our being, doesn't it? We want to see. Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Well, I just want to give us a challenge when it comes to living by faith. I don't know what kind of thing God is presenting you with. Often we look at them as obstacles when they're really opportunities to grow in our faith and to serve him in greater ways. I don't know what yours is, but I think we often get distracted, just like the woman at the well this morning. We get off on all these tangents, and we often misinterpret things. So I just want to highlight some things. What is living by faith? Well, let's look at what it's not and then what it is. It is not presuming upon God to give you what you want, when you want it, and how you want it. It's not the Burger King way. I don't think they even use that slogan anymore, but back when we lived in America, they did. And you know what? That's the Christianity that Joel Osteen and others are presenting. And that's what's being presented all around Africa. No, faith is not presuming upon God to do what you want. It's knowing the promises of God that he specifically said, this is for you, and then trusting God to keep his word. That's what it is. It's not, God, I want this, therefore you have to give me. It's, God, you said this, therefore I will trust you. Number two, it's not treating God as a flight attendant to serve you on your journey to heaven. God, I'd like a little snack. I'd like a Coca-Cola, please. No, that's not what he's there for. That's not living by faith, even though there's lots of Bible study materials out there that would lead you to believe that. No, it's knowing the commands of God, that he's the boss, and then keeping them no matter what the obstacles are. That's faith. Third misconception that often we face. Living by faith is not you as the master telling God as your genie what your next noble wish is. I mean, a lot of times we sensationalize and spiritualize it, right? We can come up with a spiritual reason for everything we want. No, it's not that. It is you as the servant saying to God the master, I will trust and I will obey even when I do not see where my feet are going to land. I have no idea what that is going to be in your specific situation. For you who are in college, for you who are in high school, for you who are heading off to work tomorrow, for those of you who are retired, I don't know. But I know this, God is always going to lead us to a point where there's a crisis of belief to see how much we trust him and to see if we're going to look to his promises, to keep his word, to keep his commands no matter what the obstacles are, and to step out on, to not just step, to leap out on faith even when we can't see the outcome. So I hope that that will be in your mind as tonight you might even have to dodge a deer leaping over your car. And for those of deer hunting, maybe you'll be thinking of it tomorrow. Let's all make sure that we're leaping by faith. Pastor?